And of course, I'm particularly pleased to see our guest of honor, Bernie Sanders, here. Welcome, Senator Sanders. My name is Stefan Gosepat. I'm a professor of philosophy at this university. We are honored that you, Senator Bernie Sanders, it's my natural habit, sorry, have chosen to speak today on the campus of the Freie Universität Berlin. You appear to many in Europe, and especially to the younger generation, and I'm very grateful to see so many young students here, as a bearer of hope in the last US presidential election, the result of which was very unpleasant for many of us Europeans. But your steadfast advocacy for greater social and economic justice, especially in education, continues to inspire many citizens throughout the world. So it is fitting that you have stopped here in Berlin at the Free University, where in 1963, John F. Kennedy gave one of his most celebrated landmark speeches just outside the window over there. Although not as famous as his speech delivered at the Schöneberger Rathaus, I guess a day later, it was truly path-breaking. Kennedy said, and now I'm quoting, "This school, and this must be true of every university, must be interested in turning out the citizens of the world, men who comprehend the difficult, sensitive tasks that lie before us as free men and women, and men who are willing to commit their energies to the advancements of a free society." End of quote. It certainly seems to me and others that you, Senator Sanders, are exactly the right person to continue this great tradition at our university. Whatever else the election of Donald Trump has brought, it has definitely catalyzed a worldwide repoliticization, awakening an otherwise rather apolitical youth to the fact that their voice and their commitment matter enormously. Justice is not a gift from the goddess Justitia. The conditions of justice are man-made. Therefore, justice must be fought for and won politically. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, it appeared to many, falsely, that freedom had no cost and that liberalism has finally triumphed for good. Now we must see and face again the painful realization that freedom is under threat everywhere, even in the West, where we thought it was relatively safe. We cannot stop working for our freedom. In this respect, the name of this university is as relevant today as it was 15 years ago, when we were one of the most prominent locations of the worldwide student movement in 67-68. Speaking of freedom, we do not mean that what libertarians have in mind, namely a bare freedom stripped of any social rights. We understand it rather in the best old European tradition, the promotion of social liberty, where freedom is secured by rights for everyone, regardless of gender, religion, or class. In this regard, Senator Sanders, many of your reform proposals seem more than justified. Whatever justice we have in Germany, it is not separable from the conditions of the United States. In today's globalized world, we can only achieve an equitable international order if the US helps to take the lead on issues such as climate change, global trade, disarmament, the fight against terror, and migration. Even if your proposals would seem too radical for some, even in Germany, we sincerely welcome your intervention in these most challenging times. Many thanks for coming to speak to us today, Bernie Sanders. one last remark to explain this occasion. Senator Sanders is here largely because of the release of the German edition of his book, Our Revolution, A Future to Believe in, which has just been published by Ullstein Press under the title Unsere Revolution, wir brauchen eine gerechte Gesellschaft. Ullstein Press was kindly enough to contact me to see if we might plan to plan a joint event at the Free University on the occasion of Bernie Sanders' visit here in Berlin. We pursued this wonderful idea and right away, and the incredible turnout testifies to its importance. We are broadcasting this event even via live stream. Ullstein Press had the good idea to bring Die Zeit on board as a co-organizer. Christoph Amend of Die Zeit will moderate the discussion following Senator Sanders' speech. I am very grateful to all three partners, the Free University, the Ullstein Press, and Die Zeit, for having cooperated so successfully on this event, and I'm especially grateful to those working behind the scenes who contribute to this organization as well. With this, I will lead the floor to Dr. Sif Bublitz, the director of Ullstein Press. I wish you all an inspiring evening, and thank you once again, Bernie Sanders, for joining us today.
Yeah, hello, good evening, everybody. There are moments in the life of a publisher when the books on your list suddenly start having a conversation with each other. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's really exciting. So about 6 weeks ago, we published a book called Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. It's a memoir about growing up in a poor industrial town in the American Midwest. The book was a bestseller in the United States, and to our surprise, it became one here as well. That wasn't very likely because it's really not set in very familiar territory, seen from here. But it hit a nerve here. Why was that? I think the reason is that by telling his own story and that of his family, J.D. Vance showed what it feels like not to be in charge of your own life, to be somehow separate from it, tossed apart, while society is really happening somewhere else. And I think that's a feeling that people can relate to here as well. Now this week, we're proud to publish Bernie Sanders' book, Our Revolution. And reading those two books back to back somehow made it feel as though they're speaking to each other. They're very different books, very different points of view, but parts of Our Revolution almost read like a political reflection on the story of Hillbilly Elegy. Our Revolution explains what it is in a society that makes someone like J.D. Vance and his family feel the way they do. And it makes clear what we ought to change if we want to live in a society where people can reasonably take charge of their own lives. And that's important for us to know. Here in Germany, in Europe, in the United States, and in any society that calls itself civil. So books having a conversation with each other are a wonderful thing, but it's even more wonderful to have a live conversation with a great author. It's a huge pleasure to all of us that Senator Sanders is joining us tonight, and I too would like to thank our author and Mrs. Sanders for coming all the way to Berlin. And I'd like to thank our partners in this event, the Free University of Berlin, particularly Stefan Gosepat, and ZEITmagazin, particularly its editor-in-chief, Christoph Amend. Christoph will be our host tonight, so the floor's all yours now, and a warm welcome to you.
Welcome also from my side. Thanks for waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a man who last year seemed to have lost the race, but by now has come out of that race as a winner. A man whose family came from Poland originally, and whose father was accepted as a 70-year-old migrant to the United States nearly a century ago. He was born in 1941, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, moved to Vermont in the 60s, was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1981 as an independent, and became one of the most popular mayors in the US. In 1991, he was elected to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Since 2007, he's been a United States Senator, and in 2015, he announced he would try to become the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. Well, we know how this turned out. This week, the translation of his new book is published here in Germany. In the US, as Sif has already mentioned, it's been a New York Times bestseller. And in this book, he gives fascinating insights about life and about his life and into American politics. We'll be talking about that later that evening. But please welcome on stage the man whose admirers still feel the burn, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. And Jane, my wife, and I are delighted to be here at the Free University of Berlin. Let me, during the course of my remarks, talk a little bit about some of what I know interests all of you, and that is what the hell is going on in the United States. And then I'll talk a little bit about the book. And if you're interested in American politics, I think you'll enjoy the book. And lastly, Christoph and I will do some questions and answers, I think questions that you have submitted. Let me begin by stating the obvious, and a view that is shared by the vast majority of the American people, and in fact, a strong majority of the people in the United States Congress. And that is, since the horrors of World War II, the relationship between the United States and Europe has been an essential one in promoting engagement, preventing conflict, and improving the standard of living for hundreds of millions of people. In my view, this is a relationship that must continue, not only for the people of the United States and Europe, but for greater stability throughout the world. And President Trump notwithstanding, that is the view of the overwhelming majority of the American people. Further, it is my strong opinion that it would be foolhardy, it would be dangerous for the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, we don't know what will happen. There are news reports, literally, that just came in a few hours ago that suggest that Trump will, in fact, withdraw. But if he does that, I will say two things to you. Number one, obviously it is a horrific mistake, but number two, understand that the American people, and I know you in Germany and people throughout this world, understand, unlike President Trump, that climate change is not a hoax, but it is a reality, a dangerous reality, caused by human activity, that climate change is already causing major problems all over the world, and that it is absolutely imperative. And again, I congratulate Germany for the work that you are doing. And in the United States, I want you to know that many states, including my own, are moving aggressively to do the right thing, and that is to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And if there is any clear example of the need for international cooperation, it is clearly the crisis of climate change, and why the Paris Agreement is so important. Germany alone is not going to stop the warming of the planet. It is not going to stop increased floods and droughts and heat waves and rising sea levels and the acidification of oceans all over the world. Germany can't do it alone. China can't do it alone. The United States can't do it alone. This is a crisis of extraordinary consequence that calls out for strong international cooperation if we are to leave this planet for our children and grandchildren in a way that is healthy and habitable. So I want you to know that in the United States, no matter what Trump believes or what Trump does, all over our country, there is an aggressive effort to take on the very powerful fossil fuel industry. And this is an industry, whether it's oil, gas, coal, who are more concerned about their short-term profits than the future of this planet. So please understand that in America, in my state of Vermont, and throughout the country, people are moving to solar, they're moving to wind, they're moving to geothermal. We're putting billions of dollars into weatherizing our buildings. We're moving aggressively to move away from the current transportation system into electrifying our vehicles. So no matter what Trump may say or do not think that the people of the United States are turning their backs on this crisis. Further, in terms of another crisis that impacts the entire world, it will only be through strong international cooperation that we effectively address the threat of terrorism. The United States is safer from terrorist attacks when Germany shares intelligence with us. Germany is safer from terrorist attacks when the United Kingdom shares intelligence with you. And we are all safer when we stand together in fighting terrorism and protecting each other. That is what international cooperation is about and must be about. As I arrived in Europe, there seems to be a question on a lot of people's minds here, and that has to do with my thoughts and my opinions on Donald Trump's presidency. So let me say a few words about that. It is no great secret that for many reasons, I am, to say the least, not a great fan of President Donald Trump. And let me very briefly state a few of those reasons. First, in terms of domestic policy, what happens in the United States, and I am a senator from the state of Vermont, so obviously that is of great concern to me and my constituents. In terms of domestic policy, it is important that we take a hard look at the disastrous budget proposal that Trump just submitted to Congress. And I want you all to hear this, because this tells you how far out of touch Donald Trump is with the American people, not only on climate change, not only on international cooperation, but on the life and death issues that impact the working families of America. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality in the United States, the Trump budget is an outrageous document. It is the most horrific budget ever submitted to Congress in the modern history of the United States. This is a budget which is nothing less than a massive transfer of wealth from working families, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor to the top 1%. Trump's budget, if you can believe it, I know a lot of what I'm saying to you, you're going to scratch your heads because, it just seems improbable, but Trump's budget would throw 23 million Americans off of the health insurance they currently have. And recently, as a result of the Affordable Care Act, we expanded health care, not to everybody. And the Affordable Care Act, the so-called Obamacare, does not go as far as I believe health care reform should go. But it was a start. The Trump budget would tell a working class family that they are going to lose the insurance they currently have. And we do not know what happens to that family when mom or dad or the kids become sick. But what we do know is if this budget were to go through, if the disastrous Republican health care plan were to go through, no question in my mind but that thousands of Americans would die needlessly because they could not get to a doctor when they should have been able to. But not only does his budget throw 23 million Americans off of health care, it makes massive cuts to nutrition programs. Now, we're talking about the basic necessities of life, nothing fancy here. People need health care, they need to eat. And in America, we have millions of people who are literally struggling in terms of putting food on the table. There is a program which most of you, I suspect, are not familiar with. It's called the Women, Infant, Children's Nutrition Program. And what it does is provide nutrition to low-income pregnant women and their babies so that the pregnancy could be a successful one and kids get off to a healthy start in life. Trump's budget makes massive cuts to that program, makes massive cuts to affordable housing at a time when many people in the United States are spending 40 or 50% of their income just to put a roof over their heads. This budget makes large cuts to environmental protection, and it does all of that, cutting programs that mean life and death for millions of Americans at the same exact time as it provides $3 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% over a 10-year period. You got it right. That is the right response. So imagine, again, massive income and wealth inequality already today. And what this budget does is says, we're going to save money by cutting programs that children and working people desperately need. And then we're going to give $3 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. Now, as some of you may know, when Trump ran for president, he campaigned by saying that I, Donald Trump, I'm a different type of Republican. I'm going to be on the side of working people. I'm going to be on the side of those people in pain. But clearly, since he has been president, what we have seen is that virtually all of his policies are policies that turn their backs on working people and give enormous help to the billionaire class. So that's one area where I have deep, deep concerns about what Trump is doing. Second area, I am very concerned about Donald Trump's disrespect for democracy, for tolerance, and for traditional American values. His unprecedented attacks against the media are nothing less than an effort to intimidate those who would criticize him and to undermine respect for dissent and a free press. It has never happened. Look, I'm a politician. I have problems with the media every day. Every politician in every country does. But to have a president of the United States essentially say that the New York Times, the Washington Post, CBS, CNN, NBC, it's all a lie. Everything they say is fake news. Don't believe a word of it. And if you want the truth, the only way you are going to get it is from Donald Trump. Not a laughing matter. That is serious, serious business. That is a major assault on democracy in the United States. Furthermore, in the United States, and of course in Germany and every democratic country, we have an independent judiciary. And their job is to hear the evidence as best they can and make their decisions. Sometimes I agree with what the courts do. Often I don't agree. But when the courts disagreed with Donald Trump on his Muslim ban, he had the nerve to refer to that judge as a so-called judge. So you're seeing the President of the United States again in an unprecedented way attack the independent judiciary of the United States. His attack against the judiciary seeks to diminish a co-equal branch of government as outlined in the Constitution of the United States. Furthermore, and I say this without any pleasure, and I say this not in a partisan way, because all of you should know it, as I'm sure it's true here at the Free University and throughout your country. We all have friends, and I have colleagues in the United States Senate who are very, very conservative and whom I disagree with on every issue. But the difference between them is many of them believe what they say. They are honest. This is what they believe, and they say it, and I respect that. Some of them are my friends. But what we are seeing in President Trump is a man who time after time after time tells blatant lies and makes outrageous claims that are not backed up by facts. And one of the lies that he told, and he told it for a reason, and some of you may know this, some of you may not, but a couple of months ago he said, you know, we just had an election in November where Trump won, and he said 3 to 5 million people, that's a lot of people, voted illegally. They were not allowed to vote. They voted illegally in that election, 3 to 5 million. Well, it turns out there is no election official in the United States, not Democrat, not Republican, not anybody who believes that is true. Now, why did Trump say that? He said it because he supports the current efforts now going on in many Republican states to suppress the vote, to make it harder for poor people, for people of color, for old people to participate in the electoral process. And that's what Republican governors and legislatures are doing. And when Trump says outrageously and absolutely inaccurately that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally in America's presidential election, what he is saying to those governors is, you go for it. You go forward and you make sure you suppress the vote. Make it impossible for people who will vote against me or vote against you to participate. And if that is not undermining everything that America stands for, I don't know what is. Further, I am outraged at President Trump's efforts to divide the American people up on the basis of race, religion, or national origin. Historically, whether presidents have been progressive or conservative, what presidents always understood, what leaders of countries all over the world understand, is that the job of a leader is to bring people together, not divide them up. I also, in terms of respect, or I should say lack of respect for democracy and America's democratic values, I must say that I find it rather strange that the President of the United States, a nation which has historically led the world in promoting democracy, we invest a lot of money in helping developing countries move toward democracy, sometimes with success, sometimes not. But our value system is we believe in democracy and the right of the people to control their own futures. I find it incomprehensible that we have a president today who seems to be more comfortable with autocrats and authoritarian politicians than with leaders of democratic nations. Frankly, many Americans are scratching their heads, they really are, and trying to figure out why it is that Donald Trump seems to admire President Vladimir Putin quite so much. Putin, as all of you know, is a leader who has severely repressed democracy in his own country, has interfered in the free elections in the United States, France, and in countries all over the world. Germany, watch out. You could well be next. And you have a man in Putin who has spent the last years trying to destabilize democracy around the world. Americans are wondering why President Trump has such kind words for President Duterte of the Philippines, who is radically undermining civil rights and civil liberties in his own country, and why he feels so comfortable with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, a hereditary monarchy which treats women as third-class citizens and which promotes Wahhabism, a radical and extreme version of Islam. I am frequently asked by people in my own country and around the world as to how it was that Donald Trump won the presidential election. And obviously there are many, many reasons why. But one of the major reasons, and I think people outside of the United States may not fully appreciate this, is that Trump won the White House because many millions of working class Americans, often in rural areas, are being left behind by the global economy. and by a lack of training for new high-tech jobs that are being created. In other words, the world is moving very, very fast. But if you go to towns in America, often in rural areas, what you'll find is factories that are rusting away. You'll find towns where the young people are leaving, where the schools are seeing a decline in the number of kids who are attending. And those people have for too long been neglected and ignored by politicians in general and by the Democratic Party in particular. And what those people were saying is, does anybody know that I cannot live on $9 an hour? Does anybody know that I don't have any health insurance, or if I do, the deductible or copayment is so high I cannot go to a doctor when I need to? Does anybody know that I'm a single mother, but I cannot afford $10,000 a year for childcare when I make $30,000 a year? That I can't afford to pay 40–50% of my income for housing? Does anybody know that I am worried to death about what will happen to my child because my kid can't afford to go to college because it is so expensive and there are no decent jobs in my community? Is anybody listening to my pain? And the sad truth is that in Washington, we have not listened to that pain. And the truth is, and I am not sure that many Europeans know this, but for 40 years, and I'll go into this a little bit more in a moment, but for the last 40 years, while technology has exploded, while workers have become more productive, while an enormous amount of wealth was created in the United States, in the midst of all of that, the middle class of the United States has been shrinking. 43 million Americans live in poverty, some in desperate poverty, while almost all new income and wealth created has gone to the people on top. So people are looking, they're working. In my state, it is not uncommon. And when we tell people what kind of vacations you have here in Europe, they get very jealous. They get jealous because many of the new jobs, if you're going out for a job, do you know how many vacation days you may be getting in your new job? 0. Young lady got that answer. Now, you got that? You go to work, you have 0 vacation time, you have 0 paid family and medical leave. So if you are a mom and your kid gets sick, you're going to have to make the choice of staying home with your kid or maybe getting fired from your job. But this issue of what's happening in America to a declining middle class, let me assure you, is not limited to the United States of America. It exists in many, many parts of our world. As a result of the global economy, the multinational corporations are doing extremely well, and the wealthiest people, not just in the United States, but in country after country after country, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. They like unfettered free trade, because in America, that means you could shut down a factory where people were making a living wage and then move to China or Mexico where you're paying people a small fraction of the wages being paid to American workers. You got huge financial institutions that are not American financial institutions. They exist all over the world, and the ability of nations to control these financial institutions is very much in doubt. In the United States and throughout the entire world, trillions of dollars of corporate profits avoid taxation because of tax systems that allow the big money interests to transfer money at the click of a button to escape their tax obligations in the countries in which they function. In the United States, and it's true all over the world, in the United States you have corporations that make billions of dollars a year in profit who pay zero federal taxes because they stash their profits in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda, in Luxembourg, in Ireland, or wherever it may be. Now, in terms of, so this is, again, in terms of international cooperation, this is an area where we all must work together. It is not acceptable that huge, profitable corporations avoid paying their fair share of taxes, whether it's in the United States, Germany, the UK, or any place else. And in terms of what's going on in the United States, let me tell you what very, very few elected officials will tell you. And that is, my greatest fear is that the United States today is moving in the direction of becoming an oligarchic form of society, an oligarchy, in which a small number of billionaires control our economy as well as our political life. And by the way, when we talk about oligarchy and the power of the few over the many, please do not think this is just an American phenomenon. It is, again, an international issue. Globally, if you can believe it, the top 1% globally now owns more wealth than the bottom 99% of the world's population, some 3.6 billion people. Furthermore, if you can believe this, the wealthiest 8 people in the world, 8 people, own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population. Can you imagine? In a world where children die today because their families do not have the money to buy medicine for easily prevented diseases. In a world where people are finding it harder and harder to get clean drinking water or decent housing. 8 of the wealthiest people on this planet now own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population. Our job is not to accept that outrage. That is unacceptable. You know, it is easy to read history books and think about the kings and the queens and the czars, people who had just extraordinary wealth while their people had nothing. It's easy to look back in history. But what do you think is happening today? You got people out there worth 30, 40, 50 billion dollars who own hundreds of automobiles, they own yachts. They couldn't spend that money in 1,000 lifetimes. And then on the other hand, we have children who are dying needlessly. People can't get to the doctor when they should. Our job is to stand together, Germany, the United States, the entire world, and say that in this moment of history, when we have so much technology, we have the potential to do so much to improve life, that we have got to stand up all over this world to this billionaire class and tell them that their greed and their selfishness is no longer acceptable, and we are going to take them on. Let me just say a few words. Publisher invited me here. They would like me to talk about the book. What the book does, the book, interestingly enough, was written before the November election. So I did not know who would win. What the book does is two things. It talks about the presidential campaign. And it talks about my belief and my wife Jane's belief that it would have been wrong to allow the Democratic primary to essentially go uncontested. That it was terribly important to raise issues that the American people wanted to have discussed. And in that regard, because I'm sure it is not just the United States, but it is countries all over the world, one of the great issues that we face is that the most important issues facing us are very rarely discussed. And if you read the book, if you buy the book and you find it boring, go to the last chapter, which deals with corporate media. And my view of corporate media is not Donald Trump's. It's not that I think they lie all the time and so forth. They don't. But what it is, what they do is very often avoid the most important issues facing the United States and facing the world. And your job, and I think the job of every citizen on this planet, is to go deep into their guts and into their hearts and say, wait a second, that is not the most important issue. The most important issue is this and that and that. Don't let the front pages of the papers convince you what is most important. You have got to make that decision. We started the presidential campaign with no money, no organization, and very little name recognition. Very few people knew me outside of the state of Vermont, which is one of the smallest states in the country and a beautiful state, and I hope when you guys get to the United States you come and visit us. But we started this campaign not only with very few resources and little name recognition. Frankly, we hadn't a clue how you run for president of the United States. Not a clue. But we learned pretty quickly. And the main point was that what we found as we began the campaign is in the United States, among working people and among young people, there was a hunger for big thinking rather than small thinking. There was a hunger for questions like, very simple question, but a question not asked in the United States Congress. The United States of America today is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. And yet we spend probably twice as much per capita on health care as you do. That's the bad news. The good news is the insurance companies and the drug companies are making billions in profit. So the very simple question of, I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. If Canada can do it, if the UK can do it, if Germany can do it, if France can do it, if Scandinavia can do it, if every major country on earth has reached the conclusion that health care is a right, not a privilege, why can't the United States? And people said, yeah, that's a good question. Why not? But we never talk about that. How much is tuition here at the Free University?
300.
Nothing. 300. All right. Not much, right? Now you sit here and you take it for granted. You're going to an excellent university, part of a great university system, and your tuition is virtually free. Anybody here know how much it costs to go to Harvard or Yale? Actually more than that. But above and beyond Harvard or Yale, you have hundreds of thousands of smart, young kids who have the ability to do well in college, but they're unable to go to college for one reason. And that reason is their families lack the income. So you will be happy to know that very often in my speeches, I ask Americans the same exact question I asked you. How much does it cost to go to college in Germany? And then people say, gee, why can they go for free in Germany to good universities, and we have to go deeply into debt to go to an American college? And again, this is a question that up until recently was never asked, never asked. And what we proposed, and which is catching on all over America, is the idea that the United States should learn from Germany and other countries and make our public colleges and universities tuition free. Now, not only that, but we also have something that you are probably unfamiliar with. We have young people graduating college with debts of $50,000, $80,000. A couple of years ago, I talked to a young woman who graduated medical schools, now doing primary health care in my city of Burlington, Vermont. She graduated medical school $300,000 in debt. Now, I thought that was crazy. Then I went to Iowa, and I saw a young woman who just graduated dental school. And she said, Bernie, you know what my debt is? No, what's your debt? $400,000. So just raising this question of understanding that in a highly competitive global economy, we need all of our young people all over the world to get the best education that they can without going deeply into debt. That idea resonated throughout the country, and especially among young people and their parents. Let me touch on another American issue. I want you to think about this as well. Not widely discussed, I believe, in Europe, but very, very important in our country. In the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we now have more people in jail than any other country on earth. China, a communist authoritarian country, 4 times the size of the United States, has fewer people in jail than we do in America. And I was talking to some elected officials in California who were telling me that over a period of years, far more money in California was spent on jails and incarceration than on colleges and universities. And the people in jail are disproportionately African American. And what we understand to be the case is that an African American male born today stands a 1 out of 4 chance of ending up in jail. African American, Latino, Native American. So the issue that we raised loudly and clearly is that at a time when in inner cities, minority communities, youth unemployment could be as high as 20, 30, 40%, maybe it makes more sense to invest in education and jobs rather than jails and incarceration. Now, I know that immigration is a very, very big issue here in Germany and, in fact, throughout the continent, and it is in the United States. And this is an issue that Trump is using to scapegoat minorities, mostly Latinos. And the choice we have in the United States is, do we do the right thing? And instead of scapegoating people in America, do we do the right thing and pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship? And in fact, most Americans believe that that is exactly what we should be doing. All right, let me conclude, and then Christoph is going to come up and ask me some hard questions. Let me conclude by saying this to all of you, and I say this in the United States, all over the country, and I would say it in China and India and any place else. These are difficult times for not only the United States, but for the entire world. A lot of people are hurting, and what demagogues do is, instead of leading people to confront the real problems facing the nation, what they do is scapegoat minorities who often have no power. And they say to somebody in the United States, you don't have a job, it's that Mexican guy's fault. You're earning $8 an hour, it's that Muslim person's fault. And our job right now, in this critical moment, when we see the rise of right-wing extremism in Europe and in the United States, our job is to do several things, it seems to me. Number one, we cannot turn our backs, no matter how convenient it may seem, on what's going around in the world. I know that there are people who say, I can't deal with it, this is crazy, give me a break, I'm going to focus on my life, my family, my career, I can't deal with this stuff. I beg of you not to take that path. What I urge you all, what I urge all of you to do is to have a vision of a world that could be very, very different than the world we are currently living in. And it may not happen next year, and it may not happen in my lifetime, and it may not even happen in your lifetime. But right now, with an exploding technology, we have the potential to create an incredible world. An incredible world. We don't need to see children dying because they cannot afford cheap medicines. We can have the best schools, extraordinary schools, free of charge all over this world. Yes, we can combat climate change. Great breakthroughs are already taking place. We can transform our energy system. And while I know that this struggle has gone on for hundreds of years, we just drove past one of your great monuments to some war, and we got monuments in my country to some war, and all over the world, people have these great monuments to wars where millions of people get killed. Yes, if we are smart and if we work together, maybe, just maybe, we can end the horrors of war and bring peace to this planet. So please, please, in whatever way you are comfortable with, and it could be politics, it could be protecting the environment or women's rights or gay rights or whatever it may be, protecting the needs of our children. Do what has to be done. Don't stand by and let bad things happen. So we often say in America, democracy is not a spectator sport. Football is a spectator sport. Basketball is a spectator sport. Democracy is you. And if we stand together and we do not allow demagogues to divide us up by the color of our skin or where we come from or our religion, we can have an extraordinary future. And your generation, worldwide, can help make that happen. Thank you all very much. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Sanders, I have a feeling you would win every election in this room. There's a wonderful photograph in your book that shows your hands holding a handwritten speech. And you've written under that photograph, I do write the speeches myself. And as we can see here, you made little notes on your speech. When did you actually take your time for the speech today?
Well, do you know why I was late this afternoon? That's exactly why. But I don't, I do write most of my speeches, but I have been so busy lately that I've gotten some help. But most of all, the themes that I speak about and the way I speak about it are what I write. It's, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to have somebody else write something for me.
Right.
It's me who's talking, and so I try to do that. But I must confess that I've been so busy lately that I am getting more help than I used to.
Now your book is called Our Revolution, and on page 66 of the book, you write, quote, "We need a political revolution," unquote. So how are we going to do it?
Well, let me describe what I mean by that. In America, we have one of the lowest voter turnouts of any major country on earth. So the last election actually wasn't that bad. It was about 59-60% of the people voted. That means in America, 40% of the people did not vote. And if you break that down, you find out that, I don't know what the number is, but vast majority, 60-70% of low-income people, my guess is, don't vote. Many young people don't vote. So the first thing we have to do is to make politics relevant to ordinary people, to allow people to understand that the decisions being made in Washington or their state capitals very significantly impact their lives. A lot of people don't know that. I suspect today if you did a poll, and I don't know if it's any different here in Germany, but if you did a poll in the United States and you called up somebody and you say, Mr. Jones, can you tell me the name of your United States congressman? I have little doubt that the vast majority of the people do not know the names of their members of Congress, what political party he or she is. So first of all, we've got to raise public consciousness and get more people involved in the political process.
How do we do that?
We do that by making politics relevant to, let me stand up if that's okay.
Sure.
By making politics relevant to people's lives.
It's unpolite to keep sitting, right?
All right. What many people in America feel is that people, and I'm sure it's worldwide.
Feels like a town hall meeting right now.
That's what I love, and I do these all the time. That's what I do.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. And this town hall meetings are exactly how you engage people.
Right.
But in other words, we need to make people aware what is being done against them and what can and should be done for them. One of the saddest things, let me just detour for a moment because I suspect many of you don't know this, but in America today, millions of people, for the first time in the modern history of the United States, millions of people are dying at a younger age than their parents. Life expectancy for many people is actually going down. Now, what history is about, because of improvements in healthcare and in medicine, is that everything being equal, you're going to live, on average, a longer life than your parents. And your parents lived a longer life than their parents. But in America now, because there is so much hopelessness in certain parts of the community, you know what people are doing? They're turning to drugs. We have a severe heroin epidemic in the United States right now, opioid epidemic. People are turning to alcohol big time, and even suicide, because people see no hope for their future. Our job is to reach out to those people, to connect with those people, to bring those people in the process. When I became mayor of the city of Burlington, the largest city in the state of Vermont, Jane was not my wife then, but she worked with me. And what we did is we reached out to people, and people became involved. We started youth councils and senior councils and women's councils, and people suddenly became involved. 2 years later, second election, we almost doubled voter turnout.
Right.
Okay.
And also with this campaign, I mean the presidential campaign, you use social media.
We use social media absolutely.
In a very smart way. I mean, that's why you reached out to so many younger voters, right?
Well, I think the social media is a tool, a very valuable tool. But social media is not going to do you any good unless you have ideas that people are going to respond to.
Right. I know you have a very, have a Twitter account, an Instagram account. You're very,
right.
I mean, your team is very active. You don't tweet in the night.
I must confess, unlike the president, I do not tweet in the night. The way we do it, in fact, I never tweet personally. The way we do it is we have a very good staff of young people who take the things that I say. Probably half of what I said here to you will be out-tweeted tomorrow or something. But it's what I say.
Right.
It's not that somebody else says it.
And now you've mentioned your wife Jane, who's here with us tonight. Thanks for making it. But in the book, I learned that Jane was not very enthusiastic about the idea of you trying to run for president. I mean, what made her change her mind?
Well, first of all, because she's smarter than I am. I see the women are already applauding.
I know she's nodding. Yes, she's nodding.
Oh, she's nodding. What she understood, and it's important to say this again, and I want you to know this. When I talk about oligarchy in the United States and the corruption of our campaign finance system, you know what I mean by that? What I mean by that is that billionaires can spend unlimited sums of money putting 30-second ads on television. You don't have that here during your campaigns, do you? So there comes a time a week before, this is true, a week before, do we have any Americans here, by the way? Okay, good, all right. A week, and they will testify this, often in states if there's a hotly contested race, a week before the election, people turn off their television because all they see are ugly 30-second TV ads. And what Jane understands, which turned out to be, of course, true, is that any time you run for office and you try to stand up and do the right thing, your opponents, the right wing, doesn't attack you on your ideas. We don't have a debate about health care or education or climate change. You know what they do? They do opposition research. You know what that means? You guys know what opposition research means? It means that if you move to America and you become a citizen and you want to run for office, there will be people paid big dollars who will research you from the age of 10 years of age. Everything that you wrote, every relationship that you had, everything that you said, and whatever, if you walked across the street or you ran through a red light, that could become a 30-second television ad. And that's what campaigns largely become, is character assassination.
Right. Your campaign was very, at least for the longest time, it was very positive. You didn't want to do negative campaigning. Right. But then you realize that at a certain point, it's difficult.
Well, what we did, I have never run a negative ad in my life. And what we... And I'll tell you why. It's not just because I think it is wrong. Here's my experience. When I ran for the United States Senate in Vermont in 2006, not surprisingly, the guy who ran against me was the wealthiest guy in the state of Vermont, okay? Worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and so he funded his own campaign. And he ran the ugliest ads against us. My God, it was terrible. It really was. I couldn't watch the damn television. You watch the television and boom, there's this ad about what a terrible human being you are. But you know what happened in Vermont? I was going to beat him anyhow. But the margin of victory, exploded.
Right.
Because people in Vermont said, we know Bernie Sanders, we may disagree with him, but he is not the person you are portraying. Right. Now that can happen in a small state where people know you. Nationally, that is not quite the case. So what politics is about is trying to define the candidate. So if you're running for office, what the opposition will do is before anyone knows you, if you're not well known, they will research you, put all kinds of ugly crap on television, and you're gonna have to run against that. She understood all of that. But we made the decision knowing full well that that was gonna happen, that these are critical times and we had to get involved. And I think the incident you're talking about, which turned my wife's mind around, is we were having breakfast in a restaurant near where we live, and a veteran, maybe from the Vietnam War, came over to our table and he said, I apologize, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I just want to thank you very much for the work you did for veterans, for helping me. And of course, my wife started crying.
How did you react? Tears in your eyes?
Well, we have a good relationship with the people in my own state, right. and we do try to help, and often are successful. But, essentially, there are a lot of people in trouble who need help, and it was important for me to run.
In the end, and I read this in your book, your whole family was involved.
Yes.
Is it true that your daughter Heather, who's apparently a yoga teacher,
yep.
even got you on the cover of a couple of yoga magazines?
She did.
Because you don't seem to be a yoga guy. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
You're right. I should be. No, Heather is a yoga instructor in Sedona, Arizona. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful town. If you ever get to, after you leave Vermont,
here's one from
it's too
Sedona?
cold, go to Sedona. It's a lot warmer. It's a very beautiful town.
Phoenix.
And Heather teaches yoga there.
Right. At the start of the campaign, and I love that story when you mentioned it in the book, the first stop was in a similar town, I guess, but in New Hampshire it was called Concord. And you went there with your campaign manager, and you got totally lost.
Yes, we followed the GPS exactly, and it got us to the right street, except it was the wrong town. That was the start of our campaign, but fortunately, but I will tell you the rest of that story is we were only 10 or 15 minutes away from where we were supposed to go. And when we got there, it was just an incredibly large crowd. We had to go outside. And that evening, we held a rally in a town called Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and the big, big church, and it was just mob. So on that day, that first day of the campaign, we knew that we were beginning to strike a chord with many people. And that followed a rally that we had in our own small city where 6,000 people came out for the start. So.
And you also, during the campaign, you soon found out that you were winning the younger voters, whereas Hillary Clinton was easily winning with the older voters.
Right.
I mean, you're a young soul, as we've experienced tonight, but at the time you were 74, so how did you match this?
And the answer is, I haven't a clue. All of you are familiar with the term millennials, right? The old millennials. When the campaign began, honest to God, I didn't even know what the term millennials meant. Did not know. And the answer is, in America, and I'm sure in Germany, you have sophisticated politicians who poll, and they say, okay, this is what you should be saying to 25-year-old women who live in big cities who are now, working. Or this is what you say to a 50-year-old person working in a factory. We didn't do that. The message that I gave, the message I give to you is the same message essentially that I give to people of all ages. But I think what happened is among young people, we struck a nerve in terms of tapping into the beautiful idealism which exists in this generation, not only in the United States, but all over the world. It's a generation which is far more than past generations, well beyond racism and sexism and homophobia, a generation that really wants to create a new world. And we tapped into that, and we did very well with younger people.
You also do, well, that's, well, we asked a couple of millennials who are probably here in this room tonight, students at the John F. Kennedy Institute here in Berlin, who are taking, yes, they're all here. They're taking a course called Democracy in America, so that's, yeah. And they wrote some questions down for you, and I'm going to ask, I would like to ask you three of them. Would you mind answering them? The first question is, you support minimum wage for all Americans. Do you,
Sorry?
You support minimum wage
Yes.
for all Americans. Yeah. Do you also support a UBI, the Universal Basic Income?
I do, but that is not where we are. I think that is a very correct idea. In other words, what that essentially says is that no family, I think it's Finland that's beginning to move in that direction, is that right?
Yeah, I think
No,
it's
yeah,
Finland,
and
yes.
I absolutely support, but right now where we are, I mean, that's kind of a step too far right now for the United States. So what we are doing, and I'm proud I authored the legislation to raise the minimum wage right now in the United States. Federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, which is very, very low. We have offered legislation which now has 30 co-sponsors to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And we are also addressing a very important issue in terms of wages in America, and I don't know what it is here. I'd be interested in learning. In America, women in general make about 79 cents on the dollar compared to men doing the same work. And we are trying to push forward legislation that says the very radical idea, equal pay for equal work.
Second question is, do you think a viable and robust third party could emerge in America in the near future?
Very good question. When I became mayor of Burlington, I defeated in our elections both Democrats and Republicans. I ran as an independent. And that's how I've always won, defeating often Democrats and Republicans. In recent years, the Democrats have been supportive of me, so I only have to take on the Republicans. There are parts of the country where a third party could work. In Vermont, we probably have the most successful third party in the country. We have a number of people in the legislature who are part of what we call the Progressive Party. Nationally, it is difficult. The nature, we are not like you are. You are a parliamentary democracy. And if a party starts and they get, 5% of the vote, they can get seats in the parliament?
Yeah.
That is not the case in the United States. It's kind of a winner-take-all situation. The decision that I made, and what I am working very hard on now, is to transform the Democratic Party, make it a very different party than it is today, make it a party of working people, of young people, of progressive values, rather than a kind of middle-of-the-road party which often doesn't have the courage to stand up to the big money interests.
And the third and the last question of the students is, do you think America should abandon the Electoral College?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question, and it's hard in a sense to tell you that when Hillary Clinton ended up getting almost, and it's important you all know this, she ended up with almost 3 million more votes than Trump. But the Electoral College is such as you get all of the electoral votes in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, Florida, whatever it may be, if you win by 2 votes. Al Gore lost the presidency, you'll remember, back in the year 2000 because of the votes in Florida. So it's hard to say. Majority is supposed to rule, and I do believe in that. So the answer is yes. On the other hand, we have a constitution that was forged in compromise, which also says that the House of Representatives is reflective of the population of the states, but each state gets 2 senators. So we in Vermont think that's a great idea. that we get two senators and California does. But I think that at the end of the day, we're going to have to make sure that majority rules in America. And there are ways that you can do it, and it is something that should be pursued.
No, that's the applause, please. During the presidential campaign, you got support from many artists like Harry Belafonte, Susan Sarandon, Sarah Silverman, Spike Lee. But one of the most, maybe the most surprising campaign support you had was Killer Mike.
You guys know Killer Mike? All right, great. Good.
How was the first meeting with Killer Mike?
It was great. Killer Mike, first of all, the name, I got to tell you, intimidated me a little bit. He is an extraordinarily smart guy. He lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And we did something. We did a video in his barbershop. He owns a couple of barbershops in Atlanta.
You were sitting here. No, the two of you were sitting, right?
Yeah.
In the barbershop.
And in the United States...
I was just trying to offer you this.
In the United States, in the African-American community, barbershops are kind of an important place for people to get together and, talk about what's going on. So I sat in one chair, he sat in the other chair, and it was a great discussion. He played a great role in the campaign, and we are still in contact.
You also got to use by selfies being made with you.
Oh,
during
God,
the campaign.
selfies, yes. Yes.
I was wondering, have you ever done a selfie yourself?
No.
I mean, I was just trying to...
You want me to do a selfie?
Yeah. So if we can, make Bernie Sanders do the first selfie. You have to do it. Yeah. Other way round. With the crowd.
Oh, good. All right. Well, you got to do so.
Yeah.
All right.
First selfie.
We got you all.
I also found out
We're coming to the end of this very long list here.
Well, this is... we're finishing quite soon. Or do you want to take a seat?
No, I'm okay.
You want to keep saying the great thing about your book, especially in the first half of it, is that you write about the campaign and you explain American politics today, but you also write about your life and how you grew up. And one of those moments that apparently were quite important to you was at the University of Chicago when you were a student. And you were quite active in the civil rights movement, and you did some undercover reporting at the time. You and your team about the housing situation there.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that?
I joined a group called the Congress on Racial Equality. This is back in the early 60s. And shamefully, the University of Chicago, which is one of the great universities in the United States, in fact, in the world, they were major landlords in the area. They owned just a whole lot of housing in the area. And they owned segregated housing, and quite intentionally. So what we did is we had a white couple go to the landlord and say, we'd like to rent an apartment, and the landlord would show them the apartments that were available. And then an hour later, we would send a black couple into the same landlord, and they'd say, oh, I'm sorry, there's just nothing available. And as a result of that, we had a demonstration, a sit-in demonstration, one of the first in the North at that period. And eventually, after a lot of struggle, the university began the process of desegregating their housing.
But the Chicago Police Department referred to you at the time as an outside agitator.
Yes. This is ancient history. But there was, at that point, Chicago still is a troubled city. We have just a horrific number of murders in that city. It's the murder capital of the United States. But way back when I was there was a police department that was quite racist. Many of the police officers came from the South, and it was not a good department. It's better today than it was then. And what I remember like it was yesterday is there was a picture in the newspaper of a young black girl whose arm was twisted behind the back by a police officer at some demonstration or something. And we were having a public meeting on police brutality, and I was walking down the street tacking that poster on trees and walking down to this one. And I didn't know that right behind me there was a police car taking down the posters that I was putting up. And then I was informed that I was an outside agitator and the people like me were not particularly welcome into Chicago.
But generally speaking, you've, for most time of your political career, you've been an outsider, you're an underdog.
Yep.
How did you actually, at the end, still win so many times? Is there a secret?
Yeah, I think there are two secrets. First of all, you got to be honest with people about who you are, but more importantly about what their needs are. And second of all, and this is, my campaign for president was exactly the same thing as the campaign that I ran so many years ago for mayor of Burlington. And that is, it's called coalition politics. You know what coalition politics is? Maybe it's called a different name. What it is if we were to really do deep interviews with every one of you, we would find that probably on 80 or 90% of the issues, you would see the world in agreement. For example, if we talked about women's rights, and if we talked about gay rights, and we talked about climate change, probably overwhelming majority of the people in this room would agree. But then you go a little bit deeper, and you find that people disagree. My wife and I disagree on issues. But what is important in the concept of coalition politics is that I understand that maybe you and I don't agree 100% of the time. But if we agree 80 or 90% of the time, we stand together. So what we did in my campaign for mayor, we brought young environmentalists alongside of the Burlington Police Union of cops. And the cops' concern was they weren't treated with respect. They needed decent pay, they needed decent working conditions. They did not have it. So we put together municipal unions with young people who were concerned about the environment, with women who were basically kept out of City Hall at the time, with low-income people who were not getting a fair shake in the housing situation, with students. And I always feared that if I brought all of those people together in one room, chaos would break out. But the truth is, you can forge together coalitions, bring people together even if they do not agree 100% of the time. And that's kind of what we did in the presidential campaign as well.
That was... That was the first secret.
Pardon me?
That was the first secret?
The first secret is being honest, and the second
Okay.
is bringing people together.
I was asking about the topic of being an outsider. You know, our chancellor in Germany used to be called an outsider for a long time as well, for different reasons. What's your first impression on Angela Merkel?
I plead ignorance and not knowing as much as I should, but looking, and I know that she is not probably the most progressive person in the world, but and that my politics are different. But I have to tell you that in the United States, compared to our leader, she looks pretty good.
Now we're slowly coming to an end of this conversation, but because you've mentioned Donald Trump, your president, quite a few times tonight, and you've mentioned the Paris Treaty, that he's thinking about maybe leaving, and all these other things that are happening. Robin Wright, the lead actress of House of Cards, said recently, Donald Trump took all House of Cards ideas. Isn't that a big dilemma, that it feels like a TV show, but in fact it isn't?
Well, that's a good point. And Trump is, as you know, has a very successful history in television. He is a very successful promoter. And there is no question but that there is a lot of that showmanship in what he does with his tweets and with other activities. Absolutely.
Also in your book you mentioned that one of your political heroes of today is the Pope.
Yes.
And I also learned by reading your book that you and your wife Jane, you met him at the Vatican briefly, and you even slept in the same building. What was it like meeting him?
Well, you know, this is an example of what I mean by, in a sense, coalition politics. Do I agree with everything that the Pope stands for? And the answer is no. Obviously, our views on women's rights, on gay rights, and on other issues are very different. But in terms of an international spokesperson for justice and for dignity, if you read some of his writing, not only on climate change, his encyclical on climate change, but he says things about economics that very, very few elected officials around the world will say. He talks about the function of economics should be to serve human beings, not money. That women are ruled by money rather than human dignity. I mean, it is very, very radical stuff. And I appreciate very much his talking about youth unemployment, talking about what he calls the dispossessed, people we forget about, elderly people who are sitting alone in their homes, unable to adequately feed themselves, kids who have no jobs, workers who are unemployed. He talks about that all of the time. So I think on many of the economic issues, environmental issues, he has been a true champion of justice.
And what was it like meeting him?
Well, that is a whole other story. Because that...
Jane is nodding in the first
Oh, God, it's not a story. I was invited to go to the Vatican to participate in a conference, which the Pope was going to attend. To make a very long story short, there were some people in the United States who were less than enthusiastic that I get my picture in the newspaper with the Pope. So things...
And the Pope smiled.
And so from very high levels, things changed. We had the opportunity just to meet him very briefly early in the morning. And you know, again, I think he is one of the great religious leaders on our planet today.
Now we're really coming to an end. I've got two last questions. The first question that I thought was really, good read in your book. You write quite openly about the fact, and I'm just quoting you here. I don't worry how I looked. A few years ago, I was named by some publication as the worst dressed member of the US Senate. Trust me, compared with how I looked then, I'm Mr. GQ today.
And then, to make that story even more absurd, did I make the cover of GQ? GQ came and put me on their cover. In Washington, you have people who, some journalists who have nothing else to do but worry about whether your hair is combed or, literally how my front lawn looked. We made a great story in the newspaper that I didn't mow my lawn and other important issues like that. But, there are other things. Yes, the answer is that 30, 40 years ago, I didn't dress as neatly as I do now. That's the simple truth. For better or for worse, probably for worse.
For better, because also, and you mentioned GQ, but also fashion brands now imitate your style.
Jesus God.
I mean, the French fashion brand in January copied your style on the runway in Paris.
See, what I say?
So we're coming to the final question tonight. I'm sure you were expecting this question. I have to ask you. So will you run again in 2020? I said a yes. I said a yes.
I knew you would ask that, and you know what my answer will be before you ask that. And the answer is that, and this is simply the truth, we spend, in America especially, you have short elections. What's the length of time for your election campaign?
4 years.
How long?
4 years.
No, your election campaigns.
Oh,
yeah.
it's only, yeah, it's going to start in the summer. It's only a couple of months, like
Couple of
2 or 3
months.
months.
In America, campaigns never end. And people are tired of it. And the reason they don't end is, number one, it's easy for media to cover, right? Are you going to run? Sanders said this, rather than talking about the issues impacting ordinary Americans. And number two, by the way, it is easy, people can make a lot of money out of that, in television and doing advertising and all that stuff. So what the honest answer is I don't know. And the honest answer is
So you haven't decided?
have not decided. And the honest answer is that right now we are working night and day trying to defeat Trump's agenda, trying to rally the American people. That is what is before me today. And worrying about an election 3 years from now, let me thank Christoph. Thank you for asking excellent questions.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here. Let me just conclude on a very serious note. And that is, I want you all to know that in the United States, we have millions and millions of wonderful people who are working hard every day in the fight for economic justice and racial justice and environmental justice and social justice. Trump does not reflect the values of most Americans. And we look forward, despite what happened last week here, we absolutely look forward to working with the great people of Germany, with Europe, with the UK. Our job is to bring people around the world closer together and not create fights when they're not necessary. So thank you all very much for being here. Look forward to returning. Thank you. Thank you.